the Voidwarden. Jaws of the Lion's most difficult class to play, and I think a lot of players, especially when they're new, struggle with all of the positioning requirements and the fact that you poison your own allies and do a bunch of non-standard things that are going to require a lot of forethought. So in this guide, I'm going to go through every single level 1 and X cards, and then I'm going to go through cards levels 2 to 9, and we're going to talk about what picks make sense based upon what you're doing. And then I think there's actually an alternate build that doesn't involve master influence, and so also going to talk about that. We'll go through items, we'll go through perks. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do to dominate with the Voidwarden, because the Voidwarden is actually a very powerful class and she's fun too. Okay, let's get started. So the Voidwarden has a hand size of 11, but if you're planning on granting monsters attacks on a consistent basis, you're gonna need to play Master Influence. We'll talk about Master Influence later, but functionally this takes us down to a 10 card hand most of the time, and you should probably be playing Master Influence as soon as possible, but that's okay. We still have a reasonable amount of longevity. It's still gonna allow us to play, fairly aggressively and use our losses when it makes the most sense. Also, if you're playing 2 players and you're playing with the hatchet, be really careful if you're trying to grant a lot of attacks to them, because some of the attacks you're granting are melee, and so you've got to make sure you're really well coordinated. And then my last point before we get to the level 1 and X cards is that curses are much more effective when played in the first half of the scenario, so that you ensure monsters actually hit them. So when you add a curse to the monster deck, you're going to shuffle it up. It could be the last card. And so if you're playing curses in the second half of the scenario, their effectiveness is actually reduced because the chances of them coming up before the end of the scenario are reduced. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Okay, let's get to level 1. Turn out the lights. Top is a good solid attack, and it's really easy for us to empower Dark. So, adding +1 attack and cursing on this card, it's going to be pretty common and fairly easy. So attack 3 at range with a curse, pretty strong. The initiative, almost as bad as it can get. And the initiative for this class, there's going to be a lot of that. I'll try not to dwell on it too much, but it's a little bit of a pet peeve. It makes it, pretty tough to do some things with this class, especially for newer players. Anyways, the bottom is a nice, strong, bottom. I like damaging bottoms because you can play them with, attacks are much more common on the top. So it's nice to have bottoms that can do some damage because you can really burst with a top attack or a top grant attack action for the Voidwarden. And this one, play it on a shielded enemy so that that shielded enemy suffers damage. And it also empowers ice, which, is pretty tough for us at early levels because we're mostly going to be playing Master Influence top and we're going to be playing it early. So having a little bit of ice generation is nice as well. Grasp of Doom. The top has a lot of symbols and it's okay. I mean, it's not as powerful as I would like even at level 1. Take, for example, we just talked about turn on the lights bottom. If you've got Master Influence out and you consume an element, you can easily hit for 5 or 6 damage and then have a monster suffer 5 or 6 damage. That's going to be 10 to 12 damage for a loss. This loss is generally going to be worth, let's call it 4 or 5 damage plus a curse and stun. Poison's probably worth 1 damage. Maybe it's worth 2. And wound, maybe it's worth 2. So sometimes it's going to be worth it, but sometimes it's not. And I just prefer more direct damage on a loss or, more targets. So top is a little bit underwhelming to me. Initiative at 36. Okay. The bottom move 3 though is pretty decent for us. Again, dark is pretty easy for us to empower. And so, we're going to have it around a reasonable amount. So this is a move 5 a decent amount of the time. So very good for us to get into the right spots. Suggestion. Top is just not powerful enough for me because unless you can like actually move a monster into a damage trap or something. Because one, you've got to empower ice to get this done, and especially at early levels, not super easy to have ice around. And then not really strong enough. The move can be nice to, position monsters around, but still, it's a little too situational. However, the initiative at 23 is pretty good for us, especially at level 1. And then the bottom, the move 3 and the ability to curse at range 3. This is really, really good. You always need to move, and anytime you've got a really good ability that's easy to pull off attached to a move, it's great. So it's actually a great card, using it for the bottom 99% of the time. Sap Warmth. This one's going to be really fun. Make sure you stick around. I'm going to start with the bottom because we're going to get really in depth into the top. So first, the bottom, move 2, heal 3, and that's target self and all allies within range 2, and then empower ice. This can be pretty powerful in a bigger party. It's not amazing, but the range 2 is mitigated somewhat by being able to move and kind of, position yourself as well. Like if this didn't have move, it would be awful. And then the top, poison at range 3, empower dark, and then you've got 3 charges where anyone who attacks a poison monster, any of your allies, they actually get to heal 1. And this can be useful for removing wound and poison, but it's delayed and it's going to impact our longevity. So let's go to the spreadsheet. Okay, so I've created a spreadsheet because cards like this that are persistent but not a loss, they can still cost you turns in longevity, and I'll try to be brief and explain why. Also, I do have a stamina guide that explains losses and when you should play them and how they affect your longevity, that sort of stuff. I'll put a link up top here. Go check it out. It'll explain even in more depth. But for this example, we're talking about cards that are persistent but aren't losses. So what happens is when you play this on an odd amount of cards, you're actually going from odd to odd. So in this example, we go from 9 cards in hand to 7 cards in hand. And so instead of getting 4 turns in our first rest cycle and then 4 turns in our second rest cycle, we actually go from 4 to 3. And then when we pick this card up later on, we actually go 2 turns in a row where we're going to have 6 cards in hand. And so we're losing a turn because we're going from odd to odd and being inefficient. And we're actually, keeping a card in our hand each time instead of being efficient and playing all of our cards each rest cycle. So if we come over here to the even example, you can see that if we go and we play Sap Warmth and then we rest and lose a card, we go from 10 to 8. And then we pick it up, we actually go at 8. And so it doesn't change our number of turns versus the baseline. So the takeaway on this is if you play a card like Sap Warmth that's going to be persistent, you've got to pick it up again in the same rest cycle, or you lose 1 or more turns depending on when you actually pick it up. But if you play it when you have even cards in your hand, then you actually have until the end of the next rest cycle for you to either use it or pick it up. And so hopefully that helps, play cards like this. And it's one of the reasons why this card isn't, really that great. 1, it's delayed. 2, it's got, kind of all these timing requirements, and it can cost you longevity. I hope that spreadsheet example really helped you to understand, how these persistent non-loss cards can affect longevity and when you can play them to maximum effect. If it did, make sure, go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. It's the little bell so that when I publish new content, you're notified. Resigned Frenzy. Top is not bad. It can be reasonably useful if you've got a ton of enemies, but really to make this worth it, you need 4+ enemies to really, enjoy playing the loss for that. And if there's shielded enemies around, it's not going to be very good for you. Initiative at 26, though, is pretty good. And the bottom is really good. We need that move. And then there's some flexibility here to empower dark and, nerf the move a little bit and add an attack. I don't think you're going to use it for that a ton, but still, the option is there, and we do produce a lot of dark. So, I mean, just nice to have that option. We're playing it for the bottom most of the time. Freeze the Soul. Top is a decently strong attack. However, ice is a bit of a problem because we're usually playing Master Influence top, and so we don't have, repeatable ice generation early on. And you're not going to be in melee range a lot. But still, if you are, it's a pretty good attack. Initiative is, again, just abysmal. The bottom, though, is really, really good. This stun at range 3 is going to be really useful for some crowd control, and where you're probably going to use it a lot. The curse is a little bit annoying, but don't let, you not having dark stop you, because you're making monsters attack using your modifier deck, a decent amount, and they're going to be attacking with advantage because Master Influence. And so they're actually going to be able to burn through some of those curses for you. That being said, we usually do have a decent amount of dark around, and so it is worth it to use the dark for this card to, not curse yourself. Lure of the Void. Top is a very good range 3 disarm, and then you can move a monster as well. This is really, really nice, and we've got a lot of dark, I keep saying it, but if you can move a monster 3, you can very easily disarm them, and then, move them into a trap, or, move them into an advantageous position for your allies, stuff like that. Very, very good. And don't forget, if you've done this before the monster turn, and it's a ranged monster, now that it's disarmed, it's going to focus as if it was a melee monster. So if it's got move, it's going to come right back to you. And then next turn, you can mop it up. Very, very good. And then the initiative. Is this really going to be a running joke for this entire video? Okay, I'm not going to talk a lot about initiative after this. I've decided at this point. And then the bottom. For a top, this would be not great at level 1. I mean, it would be okay because if you empower Dark, it's 7 damage, but your ally has to suffer some damage to get it off. And so, not amazing. But because it's a bottom, it's really good for us to use a top attack and this bottom, or a top attack granting action. I've got to say that a lot in this video too. And so the bottom, because it's on the bottom, it's actually much better than if it was on the top. I actually like this card quite a bit at level 1. You can output a lot of damage in a turn with it. Signs of the Void. Top is not bad. We can, grant an ally 1 shield and move them 2. And this is going to be useful if your ally is not in the right positioning. You want to use a bottom action to grant them an attack. You can move them with the top into the right spot and then grant an attack. So fairly decent there. Initiative is stupendous for this class. I just said I was not going to talk about initiative, but I mean, I have to talk about the lowest initiative at level 1, right? 15 is the best at level 1 for this class. And then the bottom, it's not unusable, but the range 2 means it is so easy to waste charges, because this is going to happen whether somebody is within range or not. And so it's so easy to waste a couple charges of this, and sometimes even 3 charges you could waste. I mean, it's just awkward to play it. I recommend, for the most part, in a standard build, that you not play the bottom. But the top is worth it. And I mean, we almost pretty much have to take it just for the initiative when we have to go quickly. Close to the Abyss. Top is a pretty decent heal, and it's nice that if you heal poison, it gives you a bless. So you get blessed instead of healing because the poison is removed. Pretty good card, but I actually used Black Boon a lot more. One, because Black Boon is good at any player count. Cards that target multiple allies are, of course, better at higher player counts, and so Black Boon is more useful at more player counts, and it empowers Dark, which is really, really good for us. So I used a Black Boon to heal definitely more than this. The initiative is not that good. The bottom is okay. In certain situations, it can be very useful for moving monsters around. Sometimes you'll get them into a trap, but, positioning them so that your friends can do, very effective AoEs is probably the main benefit. Gift of the Void. Top is quite good. We're going to be able to poison a monster, and we're empowering dark, and then we're granting an attack to one of our allies who's adjacent, and it's, you know, a nice ranged attack, so that helps. And it's quite good because you're going to poison them, so add 1 damage for that. And then you're most likely going to have Master Influence, so if you can, you know, consume an element, this is going to be essentially attack 5 with advantage, repeatable. Now, your ally does suffer too, but you've got a reasonable amount of healing to deal with that, so it's not the end of the world. At level 1, it can be a little bit of a problem, but as you get up a little bit in hit points, this is a very good repeatable attack. And, you know, 5 attack plus advantage is pretty darn good, and you're creating an element. Initiative 89. Oh, I said I wasn't going to talk about initiative. Why did I say that? 89 is pretty good for going late, though. We actually like this initiative. The bottom heal 2, range 3. I mean, just a standard heal can definitely be useful in certain situations. Black Boon. Top is a nice strong heal. It's a good heal with good range. The poison's a bit annoying. Although there's later cards that kind of interact with that. I can't spoil anything here. It does empower Dark. Dark is so useful for us. It really pushes this card over the top from being okay to being pretty good. Initiative, bottom, move 2, and then 1 ally within range 3 may perform move 2 as well. This is actually really, really useful. You're going to have a hard time deciding on this card whether you want to use the top or the bottom, because moving your allies around to get them in the right position to maximize attacks that you're granting them, or even just to help them out, is going to be super useful. Very, very good card overall. Wicked Scratch. Top is decent, but sometimes it can be a little hard to pull off because 1, you're granting a melee attack, 2, you have to be within range 2, and that's exactly what I was just talking about with Black Boon. This card's going to help you get within range and move your allies so that, you know, they're adjacent, stuff like that. Very, very useful. These cards were kind of meant to be together, Black Boon and Wicked Scratch. Again, we empower Dark with this, so really good. Initiative, 68, whatever. The Loot 1, Strengthen Range 3. This is not bad. Once in a while, you're really going to love this card. There's not going to be anything for you to do, and you're just going to be able to hoover up some loot. But most of the time, you're not going to be in melee range, and so, you know, it's not going to be super useful. Cold Embrace. Maybe looks a little better than it is. The top, and we'll talk about the alternate build later, but if you are cursing a lot, the top, I mean, if you can consume Dark, cursing 4 in 1 turn is going to be pretty good. Like, it is. That being said, this card is really tough to pull off because early on, Ice Generation is relatively difficult, right? Most of it is tied to our Lost card, so you've got to have very specific timing to have Ice, or you've got to have an item or something that can produce it. Once you can kind of produce Ice reasonably consistently, this card becomes much better. But in the beginning, you've got a loss, which you do want to use in the first half, so not as bad as a normal loss that you would want to save to the end. However, it's still a loss. And then the bottom is pretty situational. Sometimes you're just going to be like, I don't have any ice, I can't move, and I can't get adjacent to anyone without moving, and I don't want to play the top just yet, and so you're just going to basic 2 move with it. So overall, can be good in the right circumstances, but it's pretty finicky. Master Influence. And I've talked about it so much already, not even sure what else to say. However, it is a core card for most builds. You know, whenever you're granting attacks, having advantage is really going to be nice. And then when you can consume an element, you can add +1. And having advantage is nice because if you do end up cursing yourself or monsters curse you, having the monsters use your modifier deck to attack can actually flush out some of those curses on advantage without adversely affecting your damage output. Whew. Okay, I guess I did have something else to say. The bottom of this card, pretty decent. Blessing is, you know, at later levels, a bless is actually very strong. I mean, if you're blessing a demo and they're attacking for 5-6 every round because they've got a buffed up perk deck, that bottom bless is worth 5 to 6 damage, and then you're also going to poison a monster. I mean, you could conceivably call this bottom worth 6 to 8 damage at later levels. So it empowers ice and it's repeatable. So it's actually pretty good, but I think most of the time we're not using it. At level 2, we've got Give and Take and we've got Crushing Cold. Give and Take top is pretty good actually because we've got a lot of bottom actions that, grant allies attacks. So we can, bless them and strengthen them and grant them attacks. Normally a bless and strengthen on the top is not as good because the majority of your attacks are on the top and it's taking the place of an attack, reducing your overall damage output. But for us, pretty good, and it empowers dark, and the initiative's quite good. And the bottom, you can put out quite a few curses with this. If you combo with some boots, add some boots in there, get up to like 6-7 move, and then you play the top of Cold Embrace. Can you imagine? You could put out 8 curses pretty easy in one turn. So if you're into cursing, pretty good for that. Crushing Cold, the top is decent. It's about equivalent to our level 1 loss, power. So, I mean, it's not a great upgrade for the top. Initiative is nice and slow, which helps us go slow when we need to. The bottom, though, is what I really like about this card. Move 3 with a Muddle at range 3 and Empower Ice is just so good for utility. I love it when you just have a bonus ability that's easy to pull off on a move. You just muddle someone, you produce ice, which helps us for a bunch of different cards. And so I usually took Crushing Cold for that reason. But if you're into cursing, you can't go wrong with Give and Take as well. At level 3, we have Taunting Fate and we have Commanding Presence. Taunting Fate heal is pretty good. If you use it later in the scenario, there's less chance the monsters will hit the bless, and so it becomes even better the later you use it. Initiative at 13 is really, really good. And then the bottom, if you empower ice, you can add +2 attack to all of your attack granting actions. This combos really well, and it's why I took Crushing Cold at level 2, because, take it with a card like Resigned Frenzy, you're basically doubling the power of Resigned Frenzy and making it much, much more viable. And it's going to help a lot with damage output. You taking the extra damage is not that big a deal. Most times you're pretty squishy, so you're going to try and stay in the back. But this is one of those cards where if you're not paying attention because you're so squishy, you can get caught and you can get hurt really bad. So just make sure you know what's going to happen when you play this card. And then Commanding Presence. The top is not bad. It's okay because it has range 3, but it's still probably not going to be worth it. Like, Signs of the Void only has range 2, and that makes it harder to pull off, but even with the extra range, I still don't think it's worth it. And then the move for Curse Self, and then you can grant an ally a move. This can be very, very useful, but I pretty much went with Taunting Fate every single time because of that initiative, because it can power up the attacks I'm always trying to grant, and because it's got that great late game heal. At level 4, we have The Last Journey and we have Savage Instinct. The Last Journey top is just one of those cards, one of those actions that's never going to be bad. Attack 4, range 3, curse, empower dark, all going to be good. It's never going to be bad. You're going to use it and enjoy it. Initiative is whatever. The bottom move 4, force one adjacent enemy to perform move 3, and then they gain Immobilize. This is a great late game move for a tough elite, a melee elite mostly. So you can just shove them out of the way, maybe get them into a trap, maybe Immobilize. Can be quite useful. But I mean, most of the time you're going to be playing this for the top, and you're not going to want to use that bottom until pretty late in the scenario unless circumstances are dire. And then we've got Savage Instinct. Force one enemy within range 3 to perform attack 3, targeting all other enemies adjacent to it, and then it suffers damage. And this is another reason why I like Taunting Fate. Add Taunting Fate to this and Empower Ice. You've got attack 5. You hit 3 monsters. That's attack 15 plus, advantage on one of them from Master Influence, and potentially another +1, and then the monster suffers 3. You can easily get into 20 plus damage with this if you've got this plus Taunting Fate. Initiative is just, boo. And then the bottom, heal 3, range 3, strengthen, poison, ice being useful to bless is also very good. I like the Last Journey just for ease of use, but you can't go wrong with either of these cards. So I'm going to recommend the Last Journey, but if you take Savage Instinct because you want to buff it with Taunting Fate, I mean, that's great as well. All right, we're at level 5. Spoilers coming up. You have 1 second to get out of dodge. Okay, at level 5, we have Stand Fast, our ward. It's not bad. Sometimes it can do some pretty decent work, in my opinion, and there will be no more spoilers here. It's one of the... It's probably the worst. It's probably the worst level 5 card. The bottom, though, is really good, and it is, 90 initiative, which helps us go late. The bottom is quite good, though. Really, like, if, your enemy is 6 away and you've got an ally that's 3 away, really, this could be potentially an attack 3 range 6. Very good flexible utility there just to add, damage when you don't need to move. So it's a pretty good card overall. You could go back and take your other level 4 card, though. Like, really, you could. At level 6, we've got Withering Conviction and Surge of Power. Withering Conviction top is pretty powerful. It does cause your allies to suffer some damage, but by this level, 2 damage isn't, super bad. So, I mean, it's pretty good. 12 damage, plus buffs from Master Influence. Maybe you got Taunting Fate in there. This can work out to be a lot. The bottom, Curse Self, you can ignore the curse if you've got Dark kicking around, which we do a lot, and then you can curse 2 targets. Pretty good. It's repeatable. This is going to be fairly good. Surge of Power is just a wacky card. It's one of those cards. Okay, so the top. If you are playing 2 players and the other players are red guard, this top can be amazing. Your red guard can play super aggressive, and then bang, you throw a 20-point, 25-point heal on him, and he's back up to full. So very useful in that situation. And then the bottom, anytime you or any ally loses poison, you gain Strengthen. This can work. It's so convoluted, though, that I don't generally recommend it. But if your ally has the ability to heal on their turn without playing a card, so I'm talking basically an item here, that ally can get 2 complete turns of Strengthen from this. Which, if you've got a couple healing items, they can be strengthened a lot. Play this with a Demolitionist, and things can get pretty crazy. A Demolitionist with its own strengthening abilities, they can go through almost a whole scenario with Strengthen because, of what you're giving them plus what they can do themselves. That being said, it's a double loss card, and that's why this card is it's wow. It's just a wow card. I think I take Withering Conviction, but it depends on my mood. Like, if you're a person who really likes to theorycraft and get into builds that require synergies and stuff like that, this is a Surge of Power is a really good card. I've gone on too long. That's it. At level 7, we have Hateful Blast and we have Spirit Hunger. Hateful Blast top is just very good, solid card. I took way too much time on level 6, so I'm going to abbreviate this one. It's pretty straightforward. It's good. 29 is also fairly good. The bottom, I don't love it for this level. It's reasonably powerful, but I don't feel like it's, much more powerful than our earlier level, bottom grant multi-target attack action cards. This video is making me sweat. There's too many complex word sentences. You know what I'm saying. Spirit Hunger. Pretty decent. I mean, a reasonably big attack with a heal can be very useful in some situations. And then the bottom, though, it's kind of like the top of Hateful Blast, where it's just always going to be pretty darn good. I'm taking Hateful Blast most of the time, though. Level 8, we've got Lull into Oblivion, and we've got Empowered Link. Lull into Oblivion top is pretty good. The downside isn't that big of a downside. So there's 2 ways you're going to play this card. One, you're going to go early and you're going to use it when there's a decent amount of monsters. You're going to stun two and curse them. You're going to leave them alone. Make sure they don't have wound if they're going after you, otherwise it's going to remove the stun. You're going to leave them alone and you're going to focus on the rest of the monsters, try and kill them, and then go back to the monsters you've stunned. Great. That's a really standard strategy in Gloomhaven, and generally that's very effective to, crowd control some and focus on the rest. The other way is you can actually play this late. You pair it with a late card, and then, at the end of the round, the card gets placed in the discard, and they're still going to be stunned for their next turn. So then there's no risk. You can attack whenever you want the next turn. You don't have to worry about losing the stun. It also empowers Dark, and it's got fantastic initiative. And then the bottom, you can move yourself and everybody up to 3, up to 4 if you consume Dark. Very useful in certain situations, but I think you're playing this for the top most of the time. Empowered Link, top is just not going to be worth it most of the time. It just isn't. Granting extra targets on heal is rarely going to be worth it. And then the move to bless, target all adjacent allies, and empower ice. This is actually going to be pretty good, but I'm taking Lull into Oblivion. At level 9, we have Possessed by Fate, and we have Eye of the Void. Possessed by Fate top, there's a lot going on there. It's a bit awkward to use because of the range. Yeah, we're going to need some help with this one. We'll talk about that in my item recommendations. The bottom, really good for burst damage, single target burst damage. I like that it's on a bottom. If this was on a top, I'd probably not be happy about it being a level 9 card, but I think because it's on the bottom, it's actually pretty good. Eye of the Void, top, level 9, it's below the curve in my opinion, just based upon other level 9 cards. It's not way below, it's decent. And if you use, Taunt Fate or Taunting Fate, you can output some pretty serious damage. Initiative is pretty decent. The bottom, though, is quite good. All allies and enemies within range 3 suffer 1 damage, so you get a little bit of damage output, and, or also your allies. And then strengthen all of the allies. This is going to be pretty good. Strengthening multiple allies, you strengthen 3 allies, that's worth quite a bit of damage, and it reduces, misses and stuff like that. And so that's going to be very good. I like Eye of the Void better just because of the bottom. It, really helps out the total team damage output. And make sure, as the Voidwarden, you are constantly reminding your friends how much good you're doing for them. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to grant them attack, and in their head, they're going to be like, I did 8 damage with an attack. Make sure you're getting some credit, because you're strengthening, you're blessing, you're healing, you're granting them attacks, you're moving them around. You're doing a lot for them. So I just want to briefly talk about an alternate build that doesn't use Master Influence. And what this build is it's a control support build, and you need to have 3 other players with you. And then pretty much other than that, it's not going to be worth it, because in lower player counts, you got to do some of your own damage. That's how it works. You got to reduce the enemy counts quickly so that, you're not getting in trouble. However, at 4 players, you can focus on, using cards like Cold Embrace, Signs of the Void, Suggestion, turn out the lights, etc. And so you're going to curse a ton. You need to have basically max curses in. That's really going to help a lot. And then you're going to focus on blessing and strengthening and healing and doing all sorts of stuff like that. And that, not playing Master Influence gives you not a lot more longevity. It gives you more longevity. And so you can do some other lost cards. I don't recommend this because I actually think the other way is more powerful. I think granting attacks and putting out damage is probably more powerful, but this is just an alternate build. It is totally viable, and it's viable in my opinion all the way through. And so if you feel like playing a little differently, you can definitely do it. All right, let's quickly talk perks. First, get rid of the -1s. They ruin lives. Then get rid of the -2. Same sort of deal. Then replace the +0 with a +1 ice, because ice is a little bit hard to come by and it's pretty useful. Then add in your 1+1 curse. Rest, dealer's choice. Do whatever you feel like based upon how you're playing the class. Okay, item recommendations, and I am going to recommend a little bit higher tier item here. So if you skipped ahead and you didn't watch card levels 5 to 9, you may want to skip this part too. Anyways, we always want a minor stand potion, one of the best items in the game, even if it's only one card. And then we want some boots that are going to help us move around, because we've got, things that like multi-target attacks that only have 2 range, stuff like that. We want to be able to get in position, so we want to be nice and mobile. And this is the item spoiler, it's a few tiers higher. You don't get it when you're first starting out. A hawk helm is so useful for us to turn some of our 2 range stuff into 3 range, and it just increases the usability of those cards by so much. I can't recommend it enough. Number 1 head recommendation for me is gonna be the hawk helm. In the description of the video, I've got a link to my recommended products page. If you could, go ahead and check that out. It really helps me out a lot. Even if you just click on the links, I get paid a small commission potentially, and anything you can do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. And thank you so much for watching the video.